arresting the decline of the European Church, undoing false modesty on God's behalf. These days the world comes to Europe, but Europeans no longer go to the world, except as tourists. The West, where the world comes to, lives in denial. It has deeply and profoundly been formed by their and their ancestors' Christian faith. So people come to Europe are coming to meet the Jesus who is being denied. That is the Jesus who Europeans should be sharing with the world. If the need to do that was sufficiently evident, a raison d'etre would no longer be lacking for the Church in Europe. Necessity would revive the Church. My reference to Europeans going to the world is not primarily to geography. It is to becoming a part of non-European people's lives, languages, markets, traditions, even clothing, diet, struggles, funerals, celebrations, but not necessarily marital bonds. People of African origins flock to live in European countries and contexts. People of European origin living in, say, black townships in South Africa are almost non-existent. Why? Is that a failure in love? In short, everyone, many around the world would love to live with Europeans, but despite this, Europeans talk themselves down. Europeans deny their own superiority because they're not ready to credit God with it. They at times acclaim other people's ways of life, but as mentioned above, do not want to live in India, African townships, even in China. What does it mean to acclaim and respect others but not want to live with them? So actually they do consider themselves uniquely superior, but deny doing so. That's a little contradictory. It doesn't help other people know how or who they are. It brings confusion. Assuming the Church to have been formative to Europe, an assumption that I know people question, the ridiculous of which questioning I point to here. Why deny this? Personal pride, perhaps? Perhaps it is a fear of utopian critics who themselves seem to do okay and to enjoy life, but of course only ever for a season. Part of real faith in Jesus is admitting to being of little worldly value. Glory to him. The decline of the Church itself, is its rats running from a sinking ship? Is it secular hegemony having addled people's brains? So do Europeans love and care about or have concern for others? On one side, yes, of course they do. They constantly do things for them, like opening immigration doors widely, giving things and money, and even handing out social security payments. In another sense, no, not at all. That's why they're against racism, denying the evident superiority arising from their Christian history. To be against racism is to deny that there are significant cultural differences between Western and non-Western people, which in turn justifies ignoring differences that are embarrassing or difficult to address. This acts as an excuse for Europeans to disengage. Leaving non-Europeans alone in their countries and locations is racist, as it is a refusal to use the gifts one uses for one's own race to benefit those of another race. Opposition to racism, as expressed today, incorporates hypocrisy. Europeans denying they are better is an excuse not to do life closely with, say, African people, as Europeans don't acknowledge they, that is Africans, have anything to benefit from them. All the while, African people's behaviour, desire to live in Europe, use of European languages, European education, European clothing, etc., reveals Europeans' humility to be void. What might seem to be humility can be a denial of what Christ has done for them. Europeans want to have their cake and eat it. The thriving of Europe has its costs, such as the need for intense formal education for decades for the young. Where there has been education, evaluation of the same is sought. Indicators are used to measure education. One such is the assumption that fluent grammatical expression of European languages indicates competency in doing what Europeans do. As if clucking like a chicken will have someone lay an egg. Here's a myth and the magic. Certainly for people emerging from Africa, if they know English and live in Europe, they become wealthy. That is not because they know how to generate wealth in the European way. It is because they can slot into a system that does so. When left to their own devices in their own communities, they can't do this. This is creation of unhealthy dependence on Europeans while imparting incompetence. Some would say giving fish, not teaching to fish. The miracle in Europe of having in part put aside angry aggression and the lust for the blood of one's enemy for one's healing, product of faith in Christ. Traditionally, healing was achieved through countering envies others, for example, people with evil eyes. Thus, healing was achieved through the shedding of blood. Jesus' death on the cross was pivotal for those who believe in him, no longer to need to shed the blood of others in order to acquire healing. It's hidden. Europeans trumpet things like science, technology, processes, civilization, the products of the overcoming of envy without the kernel. What's the kernel? Kernel is this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. Mark 12:30. Such complete self-giving to God rather than to the pleasures and joys of the world will cut out social comparisons that produce envy. The outcome, they say, lust and desire to consume, something that destroys, is okay. But submitting to Christ, that brings life, is not okay. This is parading the devil, exemplified by European people's global-wide promotion of inter- and intragender sexual promiscuity, while concealing what helps people, faith in Christ. Just to add, biological death is not the enemy, it's the inevitable. Are all people's homes temples to buy medicine? If we fear death more than God, it needs a lot of faith to walk away from those kinds of temples, including hospitals, to show love to people in parts of the world not so populated with them. This is called selfishness. Contemporary Europeans are using their doctrine of not being racist, which often, of course, is racist, as it enables middle-aged white males especially to sidestep their responsibilities, to deny the rest of the world what they have to offer. This is certainly gross in Africa. While Africans flock to live in Europe, Europeans flock to leave Africa. Close relationship with the people requires a proximal vulnerability to them. It has always been known, till apparently in the 20th century, that the visitor learns and uses the language of the people they're reaching, not the other way around, as today. Today, Europeans use their money and technology to spread their languages when they're nowhere to be seen. Visitors who want to have a long-term positive impact don't buy their way in, Luke 9:3. That brings domination by boss. They need to serve their way in from weakness through vulnerability. The church in Europe is in decline as people struggle to make sense of its role. I've shown above that this struggle is rooted in deception. The Europeans love Africans, Indians, Filipinos, etc. if they only send them money, technology, and languages from a distance. That's not remotely close to incarnational love, leaving people to be ruled by their own, yet bringing them into mainstream roles when they're in the West. That is, a black could be president of the USA, while whites are denied roles in Africa. That's racist, and grossly so. It is denying Christ to non-Europeans. There is a role for the church, the same role it has always had, and excuses should be denied, to be used by God to save, extending to all corners of the globe. Europeans not excused. This role is not to be fulfilled using European languages and money. Denying this role, even if the excuse is to not be racist, is to participate in the Antichrist and to contribute to a decline in the church in Europe by apparently leaving little cause for following Jesus.